Hello, hello, good evening, welcome in. Hello, Elwin. All right, the post is up. We're gonna do our usual, hello. We're gonna do our usual, chat for a few minutes, wait to see who's coming in before I really get into the meat of things. Oh, did I pull up my notes? Let me make sure. Halfway. Now they're up. All right, hello. Welcome in, Love Legion. And Azure, welcome in. Again, as the title suggests, we're getting into a little bit of Victorian medicine today. I actually did a presentation on this topic recently, so it's fresh in my brain. Hi. How has everyone's day been? I feel like I'm multitasking, so I will lurk, but I love you. Thank you. I love you too. I want to say a lazy day, but I got some stuff done, but it was stuff of no consequence. So does that still constitute a lazy day? How about yours, Oji Sama? Quick question, got any tips for taking care of glass showcases? Just got one for figures and it's in kind of crazy shape. Is it all glass? Does it have fabric? Is it like is it wood exterior? Are we talking about like an IKEA Detolf? Because it depends. You need like specific cleaners for specific kinds of surfaces. I'm not good at like repair, so if there's scratches, I don't know what to do. But you can for glass and plastic, more or less a Detolf. I'm using my glasses lens cleaner. Yes, you can get dedicated glass cleaners. I don't know if they'd be in your usual cleaning section, but you can get some dedicated glass cleaners. And so I'd probably I'm trying to I'd probably like dust it first to get rid of all of like the dry residue, and then see if you can go in with a glass cleaner. If need be very careful. But if there's like really gunk caked on there, you could take like a razor blade or something like that. That's how I clean a lot of my like nasty glass surfaces when I need it. But again, you'd have to be very careful. You're welcome. But yes, I had an uneventful day. I My hubris and my gluttony got the best of me. I had some chili left over from last night because that's what I made for dinner last night, and I put it over rice because that's yummy. It adds a little bit of carbs. I put it over rice, and I was like, you know what I feel like would be good. And this is like what sent me over the edge. I was like, you know what I feel like would be good, and I fried an egg, and I put the fried egg over the chili and rice. I was chasing the dream of decadence too much. I lost sight of the truth because it was kind of nasty with the fried egg on top. I put fried eggs on top of anything because it's usually good, but this time it was too much. The textures did not match at all. I wish I could just put like just a runny yolk over the chili, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good. Like especially I like my fried eggs very crispy on the edge, and then I like the yolk really runny. And so I think the texture of the really crispy egg white was kind of disgusting. And so um it was not the most enjoyable experience in the world. But yes, today we are going to be talking about, we're about 5 minutes in. Like I said, I have a very uneventful day, so I don't have much chatting, but it's okay. That means we can get right to it. Um, I might try to have this be a swifter stream anyways. I actually talked about it on Twitter in case anyone missed, but I'm going to start doing my afternoon streams at 4 p.m. This is because I'm stupid and I didn't realize I was looking at my hours that were tracked on AniLive, and I was like, why is like 30 minutes to an hour being cut off my stream time? And it's because I didn't account for the fact that UTC resets at I want to say 7 p.m. for me. Yeah, I'm UTC -5, so 7 p.m. UTC resets at 7 p.m. And so my stream time was getting cut off about halfway through, which was somewhat discouraging. Hello, welcome in Seraphim. Time zone fun, absolutely. Time zone, amazing. I love time zones. I wish we just all could be at the same time always. Hi, Yuri, hug. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome in. But yeah, so um this stream might be a bit shorter. We'll see. I can ramble. Like I said, I did a presentation on this recently, except my presentation time had to be very limited, so I felt like very nerfed. So maybe I'll go overtime, but I wanted to keep stream on time today just because I wanted everyone to have time to see the schedule change. But for the rest of the week, all the evening streams, so Friday and Sunday, I think, are going to be at 4 p.m. instead. And honestly, I kind of like that change. Not only is there a lot of overlap for the 6 p.m. time slot, I feel like that's when everybody and their mom starts streaming, but also 4 p.m. is a decent time. I like to do around 2 hours every day. So that makes me wrap up around 6, and that gives me time to cook and relax before I have to go to bed at my elderly 9 to 10 p.m. But yes, so that's just a little update. All my afternoon streams will be moving to 4 p.m. instead. My morning stream, that's on Thursday, I believe, will stay at 11 in the morning. But yes, today we are going to be talking about humorism and miasma theory. It was pretty much the foundation of Western medicine for the majority of the 19th century. Welcome in, Squirrel. Thank you for the follow. Thank you. Mwah. But yes, I'm an old man and go to sleep by 9 p.m. and wake up stupidly at 2 a.m. sometimes. Did that this morning despite it being a week off. No, I do that all the time as well. I go to bed at 9 to 10. And then honestly, a lot of times I find myself waking up at 3 in the morning and I try to get back to sleep, but my cat is so annoying. And so she she usually keeps me up. Sometimes I'll just give up and I'll go lay on the couch and use it as time to watch slop on YouTube. But yeah, no. I don't usually sleep until past like 7. But yes. Humorism and miasma theory. It was the foundation for Western medicine for the majority of the 19th century. And so this is the foundation that predated germ theory. So, right now, as we know it, things like contaminants and disease spread through harmful bacteria or germs. So, actually, like pretty much little microorganisms that carry things that hurt us. That is as we understand disease now. Before we understood germ theory, we used humorism and miasma theory for the most part. We'll get into it a little bit later. Welcome in, Fies. We'll get into it a little bit later, but uh, there was some people who also thought, your humors could be affected by touch. Yuri, are your humors in balance? I don't think so. I think I have an excess of black bile. Yes, the four humors, so humorous. Yes, very funny. It's a very funny subject. I remember when my Twitter first was released to the wild. Um, when my Twitter was first released to the wild, I made a post about my humors being out of balance, and everyone thought I was talking about like haha humors, and I was like, no, like the chemicals. The chemicals. Can I affect your humors with touch? Maybe. Maybe if you win my heart. I tried to waggle my eyebrows, but the tracking isn't good. Anyways, um, so there was people who believed that disease was spread through touch, um, and they were called contagious. But for the most part, just because of the circumstances of disease in the Victorian era, most people believed in miasma theory. And the thing that's really funny about miasma and even contagionist theory is that they were really close to understanding the problem. And as we'll find out later, they were very close to understanding the problem, but they were just not quite right because several reasons, some of which being both the lack of technology, but also willful ignorance. So, humorism and miasma theory is the medical foundation that predated germ theory. And while evidence did exist of the time of germs and their effects on health, the reason why especially the Victorian England and America had a hard time accepting it was many Victorian doctors, it was hard to change their minds when it came to changing the foundations of medicine. So the medical field in the Victorian era was exceptionally exclusive. You had to be a wealthy white man. That was about the only way you could become any sort of surgeon worth their salt in the Victorian era. And so it was kind of notoriously seen as like a boys' club, especially because a lot of these men still carried, their university culture with them. And because it was so exclusive and because it was kind of honestly cliquey at times, Victorian doctors did not really like having their ideas of medicine be challenged. It was very hard to change their mind on things like that. Like I said, the foundations of medicine, the culture of medicine, and the practices that they partook in while taking care of patients. I remember in a one of our recent streams, we actually got a little bit into the iconic Victorian surgeon Robert Liston. And if you don't remember, he is the surgeon. He claimed he was the fastest surgeon of the time, and he also had a surgery with a 300% mortality rate. And when I say he's the fastest surgeon, you have to understand that he specialized in amputation. And so this was also the period before anesthetics existed. And so Robert Liston exceeded in doing really fast amputations without any sort of anesthetic or sedative. These people were raw and awake while they were having their limbs cut off in 2.5 minutes around that time frame, 2 to 4 minutes. They were having their limbs sawed off. He had the surgery with the 300% mortality rate because he cut off somebody's leg so fast that not only did he amputate the patient, he also accidentally amputated the fingers of his assistant, and he slashed into the chest of a nearby spectator. And so all three of them died. The first two of gangrene, the last of shock. Just to kind of give you an idea of the culture of Victorian medicine at the time, and especially the culture amongst professionals. The important part to know here is that Robert Liston and most other doctors at the time, because germ theory was not a thing, they were not partaking in the proper precautions when it came to working in hospitals. They would actually often brag about not wearing gloves and how many surgeries they could go without washing their hands. So not only were they not protecting their hands, they were also not washing them in between surgeries. And because we didn't have the knowledge to connect germs to disease, they were also not washing their tools, and they were often reusing things like scalpels. And so at the time, gangrene was an extremely pervasive issue in hospitals because they were not taking the time to get rid of the germs on the tools and on their hands and on the beds and things like that. So just think about it. I mean, you already have a diseased limb, and they're cutting it off with their tools, and they're not washing the tools or the bed or their hands after. So whatever disease was in your leg gets transferred onto the tool, onto the bed, onto the hands of your surgeon, and passed onto you. At the time, again, we discussed this a little bit, but I'm just rehashing because I think it's important context. At the time, going to the hospital was your last resort because we didn't understand germs, and because diseases were being passed around hospitals so quickly. You did not want to go to the hospital unless you absolutely had to. The mortality rate at hospitals made it so that you had a much better chance of surviving if you just stayed home, maybe hired a home nurse and took some medicine in the safety of your own bed that gets washed. I want to go septic in a Victorian hospital. I mean, they called them houses of death for a reason. Like, basically, if you were to the point that you had to go to the hospital, it was almost like a death sentence. Sounds fun? Oh, yes, it was very fun for the doctors and the spectators. At least it was very fun. I don't know if it was very fun for all those who are catching gangrene from their amputations, but that's the majority of what went on in hospitals. It was either like removing cancers or it was amputating limbs. Again, mostly because if you were sick, you did not want to go to the hospital. You would pretty much most certainly die. But yes, so, because we didn't know about germs for the majority of the 19th century, and when I say majority, I mean from the start of the 1800s to around the 1860s to 70s. The germ theory did not even start to begin to catch on until around the 1870s. Your voice is so fitting for this subject matter. I'm glad. I'm glad. Like I said, I had to do a presentation on it recently, which was fun. But yes, until the 1870s, which was when the first movements towards germ theory started. So, what did we have before germ theory? If we didn't understand germs were a thing that caused illness, how were the Victorian people rationalizing disease? And for the most part, they were rationalizing it two ways, and they kind of went hand in hand. The first one was humorism, which is believed to have origins in the ancient Middle East. So, think ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, places like that, but it was only systemized, and so it was only recorded and kind of um, put into words once ancient Greece came around by a Greek physician. And so that was the start of humoral theory. It has gone through many iterations, it has gone through many different systems. Some systems of humorism only had two humors, some had three, some had more. But the most popular rendition we have of humoral theory, and the one that was applied in the 19th century, was the concept that the human body was made up of four primary chemical systems, also called your humors. And so, if your humors were out of balance, it was referring to one of these chemical systems either not having enough in it or having too much. So, these four chemical systems, or these four humors, and again, in the most popular rendition, it changed a lot over time, but in the most popular and well known rendition of humoral theory, it was yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. And so the balance of your humors dictated your health. And so these humors were usually measured through blood samples because blood was your most, was the humor you possessed the most of. And it was also said that all your other humors could be found in your blood. And so if you were sick, they would do a blood test and they would try to determine which of your humors were out of balance. And humors were said to not only affect physical health, but also mental health, as we will see once we get a bit into specifically phlegm and black bile. No, my bad. Yellow bile and black bile. Those especially had connotations with affecting your mental health. So the first humor, and what was the most important humor to have a surplus of, it was seen as very healthy to have this humor in a vast quantity, was blood. It was the primary value of nutrition and health within your body in the 19th century. And it was associated not only with wetness, but also heat. All the humors had a seasonal association. And so as you moved throughout the year, you would have to put forth an effort to make sure, say, if your humor was out of season, you'd have to put forth the effort to really make sure you were keeping it in balance. Spring, welcome in, over trigger, welcome in. Spring was, of course, seen as a time of health and vitality. It's the end of winter. That's when the plants are starting to come back and bloom. That's when, we associate it with baby animals being born, such as birds and whatnot. And so blood, therefore, was associated with the hot, wet liveliness of spring. And the humors also each kind of have a psychological element. I guess that's the closest way you could word it, a psychological element also associated with them. Is winter the season of dad jokes? No, winter is actually the season of cancer and depression. You'll find out once we get to black bile. But yes, so blood was not only associated with nutrition and health and spring and the pleasant heat of spring, it was also associated with what was called sanguine. And so sanguine was kind of that psychological effect that your blood humor had on you. Sanguine was associated with activity, being motivated, and also your social ability. If you had a surplus of blood, you were seen as very healthy, and you're also seen as very socially capable. And so that is your first humor of blood. Next one is phlegm. And so phlegm is associated with natural secretions of the body. Something I forgot to mention is that for the most part, each humor is directly linked to a physical substance within the body. And so blood, of course, is your blood. And then phlegm is the natural secretions. And what we mean by natural secretions, it's a bit different than what we call phlegm today. Things like mucus and snot were considered a part of phlegm, but things that were also considered in the phlegm humor were sweat and pus and saliva and even genital excretions. So semen were all considered phlegm. And phlegm was associated with the winter seasons. And so the phlegmatic psychological association had to do with brain function and reservedness. And so it was seen as kind of, I think it would be a little bit incorrect to say it was a very academic kind of psychological effect. But again, higher brain function, reservedness was the mental effect that phlegm had on the body. Again, it was associated with winter. So wet, cold. That is the phlegm humor. And then we move on to yellow bile. Yellow bile covers most of the refuse that the human body produces. So think of things like feces, urine, and vomit. That is what yellow bile covers. And it was thought that all of your yellow bile is, for the most part, stored in your gallbladder. And the seasonal association with yellow bile was the summer. And this is because its mental effect, choleric, was associated with ambition and also aggressiveness. And so the abrasive heat of the summer was associated with phlegm because of its aggressive nature. So choleric. And then the last humor, the fourth humor, is black bile. And black bile was the worst humor to have a surplus of. The best one, the one that made you the most healthy, was blood. So if you had a lot of blood, you were usually seen as very healthy. But if you had a lot of black bile, you were seen as very unhealthy and sick. And so black bile kind of served, it wasn't associated with any specific fluids within the body, but it did serve as a catch-all for many mental and physical ailments, from mental illnesses and depressive episodes to cancers and joint conditions. So if you were sick, if you were depressed, if you were even having growths in your organs or on your body, it would be thought that you had an excess of black bile. And the psychological effect of black bile, very fittingly, is called melancholy. So depressive and dark states are the brain function that is associated with black bile. And of course, it is also associated with the season of fall, because black bile revolved a lot around, deadly ailments such as cancers and whatnot. Fall was seen as the time that everything natural dies out. And so that's why black bile was associated with the season of fall. And something else to consider when looking into the four humors and humoral theory in the Victorian era is to note that just like every other physical disease and mental illness, welcome in, Mara, welcome in. Just like every other physical disease and mental illness, your humors and their balance was associated with on some sort of moral scale. That's how they were weighed. And so if you had an excess of especially black bile, It was seen to not only be a reflection of your health, but also of your character. In fact, if you look into a lot of, hello, welcome in. If you look into a lot of the documentation of humor and humorism theory, you will find that they kind of skirt around saying it directly. Is it okay if I see your whole avatar? Of course, of course. One second. Here's the tappies. Here's the tappies. Here's my beautiful big suitcase. You can maybe there's some maybe there's some extracted humors in there. But yes, so if you in a lot of documentation of uh, humorism, they don't say it directly. I'm surprised they don't really say it proudly. I'm sure there were some who did, but black bile was seen as not only gravely unhealthy, but it was also said to give you things like black hair and black eyes and dark skin. And so I'm sure you can read between the lines of the connotations there. So it because in the Victorian era, race was also judged on a moral scale. It was thought that people who had darker complexions were had an excess of black bile, and that's why they were the way they were, and so therefore it was a moral failing. Meanwhile, having a surplus of blood meant you were in very good health, and it gave you a very fresh and pale complexion. So again, we can kind of see the biases of Victorian society, even down to the very foundations of medicine that were practiced. And so, how did humorism function? Humorism, for the most part, was the belief that if any of your four chemical systems were out of a specific balance, you would face negative health consequences, depending on which it was. Like we went over black bile, if you had an excess of a black bile, that was associated with having cancers and mental illness and things like that. But it was dangerous, considered dangerous to have any kind of humor specifically out of balance. Again, it was good to have a surplus of blood, but for the most part, you wanted things to be nice and balanced. And so, if your humors were out of balance, how were humors treated? And so, treatment in the humorism era often involved things because, again, your humors were stored in your body and in your blood. So, the main course of attack was usually through things like bloodletting and leech therapy. So when you see these big antique jars of Victorian leeches, people are not exaggerating when they say that this was used commonplace in medicine. It's because, for the most part, they were still practicing humorism, and it was thought that having things suck the blood out of you was cleansing and rebalancing your humors and giving you the time to rebuild your healthy humors. And so they were taking out the bad blood so you could replace it with good blood. And so bloodletting, which is making an incision somewhere, usually on the forearm, and draining or letting the blood out of your body, or leeches, which were actively sucking the blood out of you. Another one, because remember, if you think about yellow bile being stored in the gallbladder, another one was like colon cleanses and excess laxatives and things like that. So making yourself go to the bathroom in extremely painful ways. So you that was a good way to get rid of things like excess bile. It was a lot of clearing your body of the bad fluids so you can make room for good. So those were the three most popular treatments for an out of balance humor. And so, if humor theory is what's in the body, you need to understand how they also viewed what was happening out of the body. So, what could happen to you that could affect your humors to the point that you would get sick? Of course, a lot of it was, again, moral value. A lot of your personal choices could affect your humors. And this worked really well in the Victorians' favor because, again, they were a very religious and puritanical society, especially in the US. And so oftentimes these morals and these societal standards and these things that were cultural but not natural, they were also given a physical health value. And so if you did something that the Victorian era saw as immoral or goes against the will of God or society, it was very easy for them to fall back on humoral theory. So not only could your personal choices affect you, but also what is called miasma theory could affect you. It is kind of a sister theory to humorism, and it was also coined by the same Greek physician. I want to say it was Hippocrates who coined and systemized both of these theories. So it was in ancient Greece. So before the acceptance of germ theory, there wasn't really a rational way to explain the spread of disease. So what we did was we went to miasma theory. And this is what I was talking about when I say the Victorians were very close to understanding the problem. They were just right there. And I think that's a very interesting development in medicine to see, is to see the gradual shift towards germ theory and how they got so close, so close, so close. And then they finally decided to accept germ theory as the new foundation of medicine. So while not everyone believed in miasma theory, some also believed in contagion theory. And again, they were called contagionists in that disease was spread through touch and not through air. They were both kind of right in a way, but they were, again, they just barely missed the mark. And so miasma theory was described as the belief that the air itself was contagious. They didn't know that germs and bacteria were in the air itself, but they did know that contagions were being stored in the air. And once again, this is almost true, but it was just the bacteria that was being carried in the air that was spreading disease. And something to remember is that for a lot of the Victorian era, plumbing was not advanced. And there was also a lot of large impoverished populations moving into these very small cities that do not have a lot of room. And so there was a lot of people crammed into very small streets and houses. And so there wasn't really enough room to keep up with the waste and the boom of the American industry, especially. And so it kind of caused a bit of overpopulation and oversaturation in a lot of these developing cities. And so as time went on and more people started moving in, diseases started spreading at an incredible pace. It was impossible to keep up with. Most people, it was hard to not lose a loved one tragically to disease at some point in your life. Children especially had a very high mortality rate in the Victorian era. One of these reasons is actually the fact that and it kind of does go hand in hand with the ignorance of germ theory. One of the reasons that children and infant mortality rates was so high in the Victorian era was because we did not have the tools to properly care for them. Infants, especially, the baby bottle was seen as extremely dangerous, and it was a very high cause of infant deaths in the 1800s. If you look up a Victorian baby bottle, the best way I can describe it is it's a glass bottle, and then at the top, you screw it on. There is a long, flexible tube, and then the nipple of the bottle is at the end of that tube. I don't know why they thought that was the best way to do it. There were many design choices made in the Victorian era that I can't seem to grasp, but that was how they did baby bottles. And because they didn't understand that germs were a thing and that germs could build up, they would have these really difficult to clean bottles. Sometimes they would not even get cleaned. And so they would have these really difficult to clean bottles that were being filled with raw milk sometimes. And infants were getting sick from them because they were drinking from these bottles that were absolutely covered with germs. And nobody understood why, again, because germ theory was not accessible to the masses. And so infants were dying left and right because of these unsanitary devices that were being used to take care of them. So a lot of children deaths, if they weren't caused by disease, they were caused by very poorly designed tools that were being used to take care of them. But yes, disease was exceptionally rampant in the Victorian era because, again, overpopulation and lack of knowledge about how disease actually works. And so, what miasma theory describes is that the air itself carried this disease, and contaminated air that would get people sick was called bad air, or most likely night air. And this actually, the concept of night air and the contamination that was really widespread in the Victorian era many years later was actually just found to be cholera. And this is because miasma theory was really persistent because of a lack of regulations and a lack of cleaning the streets in the Victorian era. Like I said, plumbing was not very advanced. We did not really have like an automatic flushing toilet yet, and a lot of especially lower income citizens of these cities did not have plumbing at all. And so they would use the bathroom, they would use their chamber pots, they would use buckets and things like that. And then once they were full and they had to discard of them, they were dumping them into the streets, and they were also dumping them into water sources. And not only was human refuse being poured in the streets, this was also the era of, riding horseback. Hello, welcome in, Dylan, welcome in. This was also the era of riding horseback. So most people were traversing Victorian cities on horseback. And so there was also a lot of animal refuse in the streets, mostly from horses. And so the refuse is in the streets, the germs are flooding into the air around them. They're sitting in the sun to rot. This waste is also being poured directly into the water sources that people are drinking and bathing from. And so there was no choice but to let the disease spread because the conditions were so poorly taken care of, again, especially in lower income districts in these overpopulated Victorian cities. It was impossible to manage. And so many people at once were not only crammed into these spaces and passing illness to each other, they were also all dumping so much waste into the streets that it was just a mass contamination event, pretty much. And this actually led into the common misconception that people in the 19th century and, Victorians specifically didn't bathe. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of that specific misconception before, but yes, a lot of people seem to think that Victorian people didn't bathe. And this is mostly untrue. I'm sure there was some stinky fucking Victorians out there who just never took a bath. But Victorians did bathe. It was just actively unsafe to submerge yourself in the often contaminated water. That also happened in New York when people were still using horses. Yes, New York was one of the cities that had it the worst. Basically, all of the big cities you know about today, especially the ones that were actually a part of the US territories in the early to mid 1800s, they were facing a lot of a lot of these diseases the worst. And that's part of the reason why you hear, again, jokes about like, oh, I'm going to the seaside for my health. Not only was were the houses in the near the seaside often built with less harmful materials, they were also free from the extremely disgusting streets of the Victorian era. They weren't having waste poured around them or in their water. It was a very fresh environment. And so that's why if you were sick and you were a noble, you were upper class, and you would go to your oceanside house to get better, that's why it would improve your health, is because the actual conditions were livable and not full of human refuse that were leaking into the air and water. You're the stinky Victorian, right? I'm not the stinky Victorian. I smell very good. I I do not have body fluids because I do not sweat because I'm made of porcelain. I smell very good, kind of like, well, I smell like old books with the most polite whiff of mothballs. I'm not stinky. I would bathe if I could. But yes, that was very much a tangent. Um, Victorians did bathe. It was just actively extremely dangerous to submerge yourself in contaminated water. And so they, again, I say it all the time. We might think of them as much, but Victorians weren't stupid. It was very natural to see people drinking and bathing in water and getting sick from it, and to make that association that the water itself was dangerous. And so they bathed, but they didn't take full submerged bath. What they did was take what was called a dry bath. And so a dry bath was usually when you would put soap on a rag. Sometimes you would put a little bit of water if you had to, but you would put soap on a rag and you would undress and you would bathe yourself that way. And so it was minimal contact with water. You weren't submerging yourself. You were only scrubbing and wetting the places that were utmost necessary. They did bathe. I promise you, they bathed. Again, they weren't stupid. Not only did they understand that the water itself was dangerous, they also understood that it was just not a good idea to not bathe. And so, if you didn't have access to an open or flowing water source, you would take a dry bath instead. They did clean themselves, I promise. um, and it was, again, because of a lot of these unsanitary conditions of the Victorian streets that expelled all of these germs into the air and the water. Now, people did not quite associate, when people were following miasma theory, they weren't quite to the level of associating disease with the water until a little bit later on. They did understand that water was dangerous, but they weren't quite connecting the dots that the water was also diseased. And we'll get into that and the cholera epidemic in a little bit. But yes, so the germs were being expelled into the air and making this night air. And so, without understanding that germs existed, people thought that it was the night air itself that held the disease. They didn't understand that it was the bacteria within the air that was being expelled from the waste that was making them sick. And so, this is, again, the germ theory was what was popular from the ancient Greeks to all the way to the middle of the Victorian era, meaning that, also the medieval times, the Renaissance, they were also practicing humorism. In fact, if you look, a lot of you can find a lot of art and illustrations and tapestry that would represent their belief in humoral theory. And I think it's just a very interesting thing to visually see develop. I actually I got a good idea recently. I didn't have time today, but maybe I'll do one just to just after this, and I can link it. But I actually got a good idea from one of my good friends recently of while I'm stuck in jail, and I'm not able to put visual references on the screen, that I should start making PowerPoints that you guys can follow along with. So I'll make sure to start doing that. But if I had remembered to do that before this stream, I would have definitely put some there. Do you have any examples? None specifically. It's pretty easy to find. Even if you just look up like humorism and humoral theory, especially in medicine, you'll get a lot of examples showing the art that that kind of described their medicine theory. So this was a very old theory. And this, again, kind of loops back to when I said the surgeons in the Victorian era, they did not like having their ideas contested. Humorism was followed for a very long time, almost 1,000 years was how long we were practicing humorism in a systematically recorded way. And so, all these people started coming in and talking about germ theory and whatnot, and they really did not want to budge. In fact, a big part of the reason why Victorians and kind of Europeans in general did not want to budge on germ theory and accepting it is because in the Middle East and a lot of Arabic countries, a lot of progress was being made in medical research, and so they were getting closer to accepting germ theory than the Victorians were. And again, Victorian surgeons and these people on the college boards and whatnot, they were all stubborn, rich white men. Again, I'm sorry to put it like that. That's just how it was back then. They were stubborn, rich white men with racial biases. And so they saw the Arabs as conniving and untrustworthy. And so they were very hesitant to try to accept any medical theories that came from them because they did not trust them. And so that was one of the things that actually sent germ theory back a bit and made it hard for Victorian surgeons to accept that that was a viable explanation for the disease that was being spread. And again, they really did not want their foundations of medicine to be shaken, especially by outsiders. The first pushes towards germ theory started in about 1854, but this was almost 100 years before it would ever be fully accepted by the American and United Kingdom's Board of Medicine as, the current facts that we have. So 1854 was when the push towards germ theory really started and research started to become more intensive. And this is a result of the cholera outbreak. Like I said before, people were dumping human waste into water sources, and the integration of waste into water that is then bathed in and drank would spread what we now call the disease of cholera, which is a completely water-based disease. You get cholera through consuming especially water, but a lot of like anything that is contaminated with cholera will give you the disease. And this went against miasma theory. This was specifically what started to make miasma theory's foundation kind of be shaken because, again, popularly it was accepted that the air itself is what contained disease. But now there were these cholera outbreaks that were being directly linked to the water. And so people were like, all right, the air is fine, but the water is making us sick. These people were coming into contact with water and catching cholera and getting sick. And so this is when the very first pushes towards germ theory in the West started to take place. And so, again, the water was infected, people were getting sick, and they couldn't blame the air anymore. And so they needed to find out why. And then a bit of time after that, and around a decade later, the French chemist and microbiologist Louis Pasteur, a bit after the first researcher into cholera and germ theory died, Louis Pasteur, he was a French chemist and microbiologist. He began very prolifically not only researching germ theory, but also spreading and publishing his research. And even though his research was kind of marvel and genius at the time, it was very unpopular. Again, especially because he was French. And, the Victorian era mostly encapsulated the UK and the Americas. And so even though France and the UK could be on amicable terms, xenophobia was very rampant, especially amongst surgeons. So it was hard for people to accept ideas from outside countries. And so not only did Louis Pasteur have that he was a Frenchman against him, he also had that germ theory was not all encompassing. Something you notice is a very large trend in Victorian medicine is that they need one explanation for everything. I want to talk more in depth and more organized about Victorian patent medicine, but I think it's a very clear example of how the Victorians viewed medicine at the time. So you'd have these Victorian patent medicines, and they were unregulated because there was no drug regulation at the time of the patent medicine boom. And so they were unregulated, and so they could just choose anything to say their medicine cured. And some people were a bit more humble with it. But if you're selling an unregulated medicine and there's no laws saying you can't misinform people what your medicine cures, why not just say it cures everything? And so people were selling these patent medicines. Sometimes they were just useless. They were these tinctures that didn't do anything, and other times they were these tinctures that actually had harmful and lethal chemicals inside of them. And so they were selling these patent medicines, and they were called catch-alls or cure-alls. And so they would just say it would cure just about anything. The lists for what these medicines would cure would be very long and extensive. And so that was the big boom of Victorian patent medicine. And again, I think it reflects how a lot of times when you needed an explanation for something, you wanted it to explain everything, which is just looping back to say that Louis Pasteur's research on germ theory did not catch all of the problems. It was not able to explain every single problem. And so that's why it had some trouble picking up traction. It really did not pick up steam immediately because it still had holes in it. And then after Pasteur started to publish his research, more and more people did start to look into it a bit more. Again, even though that there was a bit of xenophobia at the time, he was still a rich white researcher, so it was a lot easier for him to start spreading what he was learning. And so, a bit after, again, the 1860s was when he started publishing this, and around the 1870s, hello, welcome in, Viva, welcome in. Around the 1870s is when his research started to eventually actually be applied into places. And so it went from the 1870s, welcome in, Pup, as well, welcome in. It went, I'm sorry, I think I have cholera myself. From the 1870s, 50 years, over 50 years, until the 1920s was how long it took for. I got to stop talking about Victorian medicine because every time I do, I end up dying. I'm like my little doll body is remembering my haunted past of when I had consumption. Hello, hi pup, welcome. Of when I had consumption or cholera. I don't know. I probably had everything, but anyways, yes. So it took all the way up until the 1920s for his research to really wide scale fully be applied to the medical system. And that was the fall of humorism and the practice of the four humors and miasma theory, and finally the application of germ theory. It took from the 1830s when people started to dabble into germ theory research to the 1850s when people actually started putting very substantial research into it, to a decade later when Louis Pasteur started really being prolific about spreading germ theory and his findings, again, all the way until the 1970s. And so it took us, we have hardly had germ theory for 100 years. A little over 100 years ago, we were still believing that the body was mainly consisting of yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. We did not know that there were little microscopic organisms that were what was making us sick. Give me a moment. Yes, we did not know that there was little microscopic bacteria that was making us sick. And so that was before germ theory was spread. And so if you see Louis Pasteur's name, it actually might look a bit familiar. And that's because not only with germ theory, not only did he introduce germ theory, he also introduced the art of pasteurization. So with his findings in bacteria, he was also finding that there were a lot of things we were consuming and had access to that gave us very high risk for things like cholera and E. coli, specifically eggs and milk. So if you look on, if you're not buying milk fresh off a farm, if you're looking at a jug of raw milk or a carton of raw eggs, they will usually say pasteurized. And that is because they've gone under a very specific process to remove diseases from them. When a cow gives fresh milk, the reason why you shouldn't be drinking fresh milk, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, is because it hasn't been pasteurized. And so it has things like E. coli and cholera and things like that that could kill you inside of it. And so Louis Pasteur introduced the method of pasteurization. And so, milk is a very common thing to use in cooking, to drink, for baking, things like that. And so he introduced cleaning milk from its bacteria and from its diseases through his research in germ theory. The same goes for eggs. When you're buying, especially fresh eggs, if they've been pasteurized, when you're buying eggs, you actually have a very minimal risk of getting sick from them. I'm not going to recommend you go out and eat raw eggs unless they are eggs that are specifically high quality enough to, trust that you're able to eat it raw. Don't eat raw eggs. But because of the pasteurization process, eggs have a significantly lower chance of giving you a disease, again, like salmonella, cholera, E. coli, things like that. And again, that's thanks to Louis Pasteur, who is really seen as the main proponent of germ theory in the West. It was very much, I will say, it was very much a group effort, but he was seen as the father of microbiology and how we understand medicine today. And so once germ theory started to be adopted, we could understand that, hey, when you're giving a surgery, you should either dispose of your tools or you should clean them. And you should also wash your, was he hot? One second. I don't think he was. I want to say he wasn't, but I need to like, well, it's okay. Wait a minute. I just saw like a younger picture of him and he kind of looked like Hugh Jackman. Well, this person made him ugly on purpose. Well, okay, those glasses are a little cute. His little oval shaped glasses are a little cute. Yeah, see, and like in this picture when he was a little younger before he started really graying, he kind of looks like Hugh Jackman. You know what? You know what? Would. I would. He was a little cute. Just looked him up. Would. Yeah. Yeah. See, he's I mean, I did call him the father of microbiology and germ theory. I'm sure you could call him something else. A word that I can't utter because it like grosses me out for some reason. I think it's because of like all the Discord kitten stuff. Yeah. No, he was pretty handsome. Yes, and so he is the one who popularized germ theory. And so after germ theory started to pick up steam, again, people were starting to realize, hey, maybe we should wash our hands between surgeries. Hey, maybe we should clean our tools or dispose of them after surgeries. Hey, maybe we should clean the beds and the rooms that we are performing surgeries in. And eventually, of course, it eventuated also into the privatizing of surgeries. Something I talked about before is that fuck, Mary, kill, Antony, Louis. Okay, one second. I have to get my references up. Oh, it's just like, okay. Well, I have to like put it contextually. I mistyped that. Okay. Kill Ferdinand Kahn. He looks too much like Freud for me to be comfortable. And I would smash Freud's head with a cement brick if I had the chance. If Freud ever came back, I wouldn't even give him the chance to open his mouth and explain like his thought process. I would just kill him on sight. Anyways. Fuck Antony. Fuck Antony. Because he has a very romantic look to him. But I don't think he's like what I see in a lifelong partner. Marry Louis Pasteur. He has it set for him. I feel like he'd treat you well in a long-term relationship. Antony has kind of a sneer to him where I feel like a month into dating him, I'd find out that he's cheating on me and then he'd gaslight me about it and like guilt trip me into staying with him. So Antony is off the marriage roster. Where was I? That distracted me so bad. I have them all open so I could like really analyze. But yes, hospitals started to become a lot safer. If you've also remembered, I've talked a lot about tuberculosis. And so a lot of these discoveries in germ theory also helped with the developments of sanitariums for tuberculosis. Now, eventually, sanitariums started to become overpopulated. So you couldn't even really worry about spreading germs and things like that because there were just so many people shoved inside of these sanitariums. But, it's the thought that counts. But yes. From the 1870s to the 1920s, over a course of 50 years, we started to drop humorism and miasma theory, and we started to understand Louis Pasteur's research on germ theory as the new foundation for medicine, and we started to act accordingly. That's why nowadays, in the year of 2024, you see a lot less filth and easily preventable disease and things like that. It's because not only are we no longer putting human refuse in the streets, that's a bit illegal. We also understand that the spread of disease is caused through germs, and germs can be spread through many ways. Like I said, everybody, wait, that's illegal? Yes, it is, my friend. I'm sorry to tell you that, and I'm calling the police right now, and they're on the way to your house. Hi, Toma, welcome in. But yes, now everybody in the Victorian era was almost right. So the contagionists, the miasmatics, the people who believed in humorism, they were all almost right. Okay, not the people who believed in humorism, but the people who believed in miasmas and the contagionists. Germs can be spread through the air and through touch, but they can be spread through almost anything. They can be spread purely through moisture, kind of like in cases of cholera. They can be spread through wounds. If you were to touch something, if you were to contaminate something like a medical tool, you would want to dispose of it because now it has germs that could harm you, and so on and so forth. So now we understand, and there's a lot less disease to be spread. People are not dying of hospital gangrene. People are dying of sepsis on occasion. And that's usually because of medical neglect. If you're dying from something like gangrene or sepsis in the hospital, either you went there too late or something is very wrong, and your family has a very good lawsuit on their hands. Yes, that was the journey of humor theory all the way to germ theory. Just to recap a little bit, um, starting from all the way in the ancient Middle East, but systemized, so recorded by the ancient Greeks, we had humorism and miasma theory. Humorism was the theory that the human body, and again, this switched up from time to time, but the most popular rendition was this way. It was the theory that the human body was made up of four chemical systems, also referred to as your four humors. You had blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and they all had different sorts of associations. However, you wanted to keep them in a relatively normal balance. And if your humors were out of balance, you would get mentally and physically sick. And so, how did we cure diseases in the humoral era? We used things like bloodletting, leeches, and colon cleanses. This is because your humors were very much associated with your body fluids. So, your blood, saliva, excretions, your feces, and your urine, things like that. And so, if your humors were out of balance, you wanted to take out the bad blood or take out the bad urine or the bad feces, and you wanted to make room for new ones. So, bloodletting, leeches, colon cleanses, things like that. That is how we cured a lot of diseases, or at least tried to cure a lot of diseases in the humoral era. And then miasma theory. So we have how disease affects the human body, but how do we get diseases? That was mostly believed through miasma theory. And miasma theory was the thought process that disease was specifically the air was the disease. And so you had night air in these places that were filled with feces and whatnot and refuse in the streets. And so the germs were being spread into the air, into the water. But for the most part, people thought it was the air itself that carried these diseases. So night air. So miasma theory, miasma kind of meaning just the general air around you, was the theory that bad air or night air is what carried disease. It wasn't the germs in the air because most people didn't know germs existed yet. It was the air itself that was causing disease and exposure to the bad air that was causing disease. And so how did we gradually accept germ theory? The first steps towards germ theory were in 1854 with the cholera epidemic, and so disease being associated with water. And so cholera is a disease that is spread through the water, specifically water contaminated with like human feces. And so there was a cholera epidemic. People could no longer point to miasma. They had to look towards other sources of disease. And so that is when germ theory first really started picking up steam, at least in the research department, not in the application department, but people were really starting to research germ theory. And then by 1864, the French chemist and microbiologist Louis Pasteur began not only being very prolific in his research, but also publishing a lot of his research on germ theory that he had been discovering over the past 10 years. And once he had published that, there was a bit of pushback at first, but around the 1970s, again, the 1970s to the 1920s, was when germ theory started to be applied on a wider scale. And so that is the history of humorism and germ theory. I'm sorry if I rushed through it a bit. Like I said, I didn't want to reschedule today's stream for earlier, but I also didn't want to go too far over the UTC time reset because I'm a bit stupid. I did my math wrong for my own time zone. And so I just didn't want to get that cut off. I need all my precious Yuri minutes to be clocked in. But yes, that was my little bit of history on humorism and miasma theory. Of course, I've mentioned it in the descriptions of my VODs, but anything I talk about is very off the cuff. And being on live streams, I cannot always catch myself in the ways I would if I was doing like a presentation or a paper. So if you ever want to talk about these things or give your opinions on them or spread them on your own, please make sure you look into some actual sources. I'm trying to think. There was a video essayist I liked, but I can't remember their name. But there's a lot of honestly pretty good video essays on humorism. You just want to make sure it's coming from people who research Victorian history specifically, because even more scholarly people that make content on the Victorian era but don't focus on the Victorian era in in their degree and whatnot, they spread a lot of misinformation. I think, was it John Green or Hank Green? I can't remember which one. I can't tell the difference between them. One of the Green brothers, they did make a video on tuberculosis, which, has some relevance to humor theory and Victorian disease. He did make a video on tuberculosis and it had a lot of misinformation in it because, again, he doesn't specialize, I should say, in Victorian studies. And there's a lot of nuances that are in specifically the Victorian era that you probably should specialize in. So yes, just make sure if you are getting your information from anyone, it's somebody who does specialize in Victorian era history and things like that. So all I'm saying is when I'm streaming, I do want to do some more polished long form content, but I just want to say when I'm streaming, definitely also try to put in your own research. I want to plant the seed of curiosity. I'm not like I'm not like the Virgin Mary of Victorian history, especially because Victorian history is very contentious. A lot of Victorian history is very shoddily recorded because of either a lack of technology, accidental destruction of historical information, or purposeful destruction of historical information. And so a lot of it, you kind of have to infer yourself and you have to understand the contexts of the time. So it can be almost a little subjective, even in things like Victorian medicine and stuff like that, just because the documentation is so, what's the term I'm looking for? Unpredictable? I don't think that's quite it, but yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the stream, Oji-sama. Thank you, teacher. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for always coming and listening to me ramble about the whatnots of Victorian history. I like medicine a lot. It's not something I'm like pursuing specifically, but because disease was so prevalent in the Victorian era, when you're learning about anything in Victorian history, it is impossible to not also learn about Victorian medicine and their, hospital culture and the diseases and whatnot that were spread, because it was such a prevalent part of the culture. It was inescapable. When you're, especially, I've mentioned it before, I'm currently aiming to get a master's in Victorian literature and culture. And so when you're pursuing a society in which disease was so inescapable, it leaks into everything. So you have no choice but to look into the medical history of the Victorians as well, because that influences everything from literature to how they ate, to how they bathed, to how they dressed, to the beauty standards, to the moral standards, societal standards, and things like that. So thank you everyone for coming. Going over the schedule, Thursday is our morning stream. We're going to be doing a lunch stream. If not gonna lie, my wallet is kind of sad this week. So if I can find something good to make, you know what? Maybe I'll make some marinated glazed shrimp for lunch and rice. That sounds good. But yes, that's Thursday. Tomorrow I have off because tomorrow is my university day, which is when I stay at the college. um, Thursday is going to be a lunch, so 11 a.m. EST, and that I believe is 9. No, 8 a.m. PST. I know for me, I'm EST. That time is rather polite for me, but I don't know how it is for my PST viewers. So if anyone has an issue with my scheduling for the PST for the morning streams, let me know and I'll push it back like an hour or two, so it's a little less like ludicrous. um, but yes, so Thursday's lunch. And then Friday is another Fashion Fridays. I'm really excited for this one. It's about Victorian mourning culture, specifically with how it affects fashion. There's a lot of different layers to Victorian mourning fashion, and there's a lot of kind of trinkets they had at the time that I thought were very fascinating. For example, it was very common to collect a dead loved one's hair and fashion it into like brooches and things like that, which is very interesting. And then Saturday, I'm taking a break. I might do a gorilla on Saturday. We'll see. Ooh, ooh, ah, ah. So Saturday, maybe we'll do a surprise stream. And then Sunday, we are continuing Carmilla. Something I wanted to note is that I've been trying to record my own VODs, but I'll tell you a secret. I think AniLive at some point has like put in some sort of like, I don't know. I've been struggling because like I'll get my device connected to my OBS on my PC, and then I'll um, open AniLive specifically, and it'll show for a moment. But once I'm on the actual, like it's very streamer end, which I think is strange. Once I'm actually like getting ready to stream and I'm looking at myself on AniLive, the screen goes white. But if I tab back out to the homepage, it comes back. So it's definitely streamer side. It feels like they're discouraging me from recording. So I'll just have to find a way around that. I don't want to screen record from my device specifically just because I have an iPhone 12, so it's not the oldest, but it is a little old. And I don't want to kill my battery or my storage by recording it directly on my phone. So I'll keep trying to find a way to record it with my PC. But until then, and we'll see what I can do. Because I do want to get as many VODs as possible up on YouTube until I can migrate there, which should wink wink, nudge nudge, hopefully not be too long. Hopefully not be too long. And once I'm on YouTube, I don't know if I have the capacity to do it now. Oh, thank you for the hard eyes. Thank you. Yes, I don't know if I have the capacity to do it now, but I think I need to upgrade my RAM because I don't have a lot of RAM. I'm gonna be real with you. I have 8 GB of RAM. I've been meaning to upgrade it for so long. But yes, I have 8 GB of RAM. And so I think I need to upgrade that before I consider this. But I do want to dual stream to Twitch. YouTube will be primary. But once I have the possibility, I will also cater to any of you Twitch heads out there. So yes, I will try to dual stream, but YouTube is the focus. All right. Thank you so much once again for hearing me ramble. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to go over time. And now I'm going over time and I can't shut up. Yes. Good night, everyone. Thank you. I will see you Thursday. And maybe Wednesday. We'll see if I feel like it. I'm going to the college tomorrow, but it's actually because it's the end of the semester. We're actually having a party. But oh, fuck, I have something to do at the ass crack of dawn too. We'll see. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much again for coming. I'll see you eventually. Thursday for sure. Thursday morning for sure. All right. Good night. Mwah.